Nighttime. The Western Wall, Jerusalem. A tiny, improvised tribe, hoping to learn something of Lamentations from each other.
I found the verse from Jeremiad we talked about. All women, hear the word of the Lord. Open your ears to the words of his mouth. Teach your daughters to wail. Teach one another a lament.
In Jewish tradition, the tradition is that Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations.
Yeah. And that's why I started to say.
And on that 9th of Av, when we read this, in the morning, we read that piece from Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's
as an introduction.
And this is how they start here. In-situ de Lamentations Jeremiad. So this is lament of Jeremiah.
Lamentation is one of the oldest responses to death. The song of Gilgamesh for his dead friend Enkidu. Lamentations for the cities of Sumer. Most lamentations provide outlets for powerful, even violent emotions without calling for justice or vengeance, acknowledging catastrophe and killing without a demand to create more corpses. The Book of Lamentations documents the horror of war, defeat, slaughter, rape, children dragged off into slavery, starving mothers reduced to cannibalism, temples destroyed, rituals obliterated. Yet, in its 5 poems, each containing 22 stanzas, the Book of Lamentations has only 4 lines invoking godly payback on the perpetrators. Perhaps this is why there is the injunction to teach the young how to lament. It's more than a mere coping mechanism. Lamentation may function as a circuit breaker on cycles of revenge. As Dolphijn suggests in his philosophy, by fully acknowledging the wounding, the loss, the horror, we stay with it and somehow, impossibly, learn to live with it. There's no redemption from it, but in lamentation, we can stay on the side of life.
In our tradition, that the prophets prophesied in a state of joy. So even though Jeremiah was living in this terrible time of destruction, if he wrote this, he wrote it in a state of joy. You know, we have to be able to bring joy into the...
So maybe that's how it has to be this... has to be lighter, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for, like, there are 2 verses that are happy in this whole book. One of them is Chasdei Adonai ki lo tamnu. The kindnesses of God have not ceased. Ki lo chalu, and his mercy has not ended. Chasdei Adonai ki lo tamnu, ki lo chalu rachamav. And there's another 1 or 2 verses that continue with that more hopeful message.
Yeah.
I always say that.
But that's why I think it's a time of death and it's a heavy week, but there is something about that. There's a lesson about how to embellish life in the sadness of death.
Yes. Yes.
I'll tell you something strange about death in Jerusalem. I asked local young people about funeral rites and mourning the dead and grief, and much to my surprise, rather than discovering what was passed on to the youth by their elders, it emerged that the majority of people I spoke to had no sense of lamentation whatsoever.
I've never been to a funeral.
How old are you?
I'm 19.
I've never been in a funeral, but I think they say Kaddish. I'm not sure. I can check it if you want to.
Is there any specific surah that they recite for? Is there like a funeral surah?
No, anything.
Hello.
Not really.
But there are no sort of specific funeral songs?
It's not a song.
No.
We call it Quran.
No singing?
No singing. Singing is not allowed in the funeral. It's less appropriate. But yeah, only Kaddish.
No.
No.
Nothing in particular when it comes to my mind. No, not really.
How old are you?
19.
19. You've been to no funerals? I strongly suspect that if I would have asked the question about lamentation in the West Bank rather than in central Jerusalem, I would have got very different answers, despite the Islamic prohibition on lamentations. Songs are sung at funerals, often calling for justice. Okay, couldn't record it because this isn't the sort of place where you want to point a recording device towards a cop, but I spoke to a heavily armed young woman just inside Damascus Gate, and she was happy to speak even though she was on duty, and she was with 4 or 5 of her colleagues. There wasn't any misunderstanding at all about the nature of the question. She seemed perplexed by it and said she'd never been to a funeral. It's very peculiar. We're getting a lot of answers from young people who seem to have been absolutely hermetically sealed from the world of death, even those who are carrying the machinery of death.
I have never been in one, and I wish I would never be.
Now, some might say it's a privilege to feel so isolated from death, so funeral-proof, but I'm not so sure. In some ways, having no acquaintance with death when you're in your teens and 20s is like having no sex education. It leaves you unprepared, it leaves you vulnerable. And feeling far from something like grief, loss and lamentation and death is not the same as being far from grief and death. I recorded those voices in mid-September. The Holy Land has always been a dance of death, but on October the 7th, Hamas launched a wave of homicide which significantly cranked up the volume and tempo. The Israeli government responded much as one would expect. And now everybody is calling for justice amid mass murder, torture, rape, abduction, starvation, siege, much of it characterised as righteous, even holy retribution to previous abuses. And almost everybody is a judge now, denouncing the worst features of their counterparts and pointing in an ugly contest. I want to be wrong about this. I want to be very wrong about this. I want to see a future which doesn't involve stacking up more corpses. And yet, it seems inevitable now. There will be larger cycles and epicycles of retribution and revenge, with less justice and more funerals for all.
Gimel. Galta Yehuda me oni ume rov avoda. Hi yashva v'goyim lo matza manoach. Kol rodfeha hisiguha ben hamitzarim. Dalet. Darchei Tzion avelot. Mibli ba'ei moed. Kol she'areha shomemin. כהניה ננחים, בתולותיה נוגות, והיא מרלה. היו צריה לראש אויביה שלו, כי אדוני הוגה על רוב פשעיה, עולליה הלכו שבי לפני